It's great to be here. This is stop 2. I was in Olympia last night, so it was really great to be in Olympia. The book was out yesterday. It was great to be in Olympia on release day, but it's also really good to be here today. There's so many people in this room. I feel like I need to thank that for this to happen. The order of events for this to end up me being here and be a part of this, I feel really fortunate and lucky. Of course, the Beat Happening wouldn't exist without, or the book wouldn't exist without Beat Happening, since it's about Beat Happening. But in a whole other sense, the book wouldn't exist without Beat Happening, because I think the people that formed the band and the band itself, just the spirit of kind of following whatever you want to do and pursuing it fiercely and moving forward was inspirational to me as a writer. So that's super important. I want to thank Phil because putting on What the Heck Fest originally, and then with Brett putting on What the Heck Fest, and then Phil taking it over. I came up here for that year after year, and that's what really kept me coming back here and getting to know these people. And everyone was always so welcoming. I'm gonna try to move this out a little bit. The snare is like so that's good. I think. Oh, thank you. I got some water here. All right. So I'm just really thankful for Phil and to Brett for being a part of this community and continuing to put on events that were community-based and keeping everybody coming out. I asked Phil to write the foreword, and he agreed, and I am really thankful for that. And I just spent all this time writing a book about Beat Happening, and then Phil sent me his foreword, and it was like, well, the thing about Beat Happening is you can't really understand it if you weren't there. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I'm just kidding. But the thing about it is that I feel like through coming here, that's when I feel like the picture did come into focus. So I totally agree with that sentiment. And if it weren't for the generosity and kindness of Brett and Phil and Calvin and those people making me a part of this community, then it wouldn't have happened. So I'm just really thankful to them. Shout out to Watermark, of course, for hosting us tonight. And the business for putting it together and helping me. And I know I already said Brett a million times, but Brett for helping coordinate the bands, and to John for helping coordinate the bands, and to the bands for playing. The list goes on, really. I live in Austin, Texas, and so when you're far away, it takes a lot of help to make an event happen. And so I'm super thankful to all those people involved in making this a reality. Okay, I'm going to read 2 little sections tonight, and I hope that's okay. I guess after having you trapped, you don't have much choice. You can get up, walk out if you really get pissed about it. But I'm going to read a section about Brett. The book is structured as an alphabet book, so each chapter is one letter, and the letter represents some facet of the album or of the band. So I'm going to read a little bit about Brett, and then I'm going to move into another chapter about Japan. So this will be the B and J chapters. Okay, B is for Brett. After Brett Lunsford graduated high school in 1981, he left Anacortes, Washington, where he was born and raised, to travel the U.S. and Mexico. He landed in Tucson, Arizona, where he befriended Lee Joseph, who owned a record store called Roads to Moscow near the University of Arizona. Brett frequented punk shows at the town's primary all-ages venue, the Backstage, where he not only saw nationally relevant punk bands Husker Du, Circle Jerks, Social Distortion, and Minor Threat, but also found himself impressed with some of the local talent, such as Yard Trauma and the Seldons. Brett points out that during this era, many record stores tied into families of artists. For example, record store owner Lee Joseph also played in the band Yard Trauma. Rather than compartmentalized sections of industry, the underground consisted of vertically integrated individuals fighting the revolution on all fronts: creation, distribution, and retail marketplace all at once. Brett developed an increasing interest in DIY culture, decentralization, and punk rock from observations during his time in Tucson as well as through reading issues of the Sub Pop fanzine Calvin had mailed to him. The two met a couple of years earlier when Brett's girlfriend, Krista Forsyth, lived with Olympia community fixture Lois Maffeo, who had recently befriended Calvin. As members of the same social circle, Brett and Calvin ran into each other occasionally and spent time together when Brett drove Lois, Krista, and Calvin to Vancouver to see British punk band The Jam. Brett and Calvin furthered their bond when Calvin made the trip to Anacortes the next year to see local punk band The Spoiled perform at a Grange Hall, an experience that inspired Calvin to think open-mindedly about the role of community centers in art and music. Shortly after a visit from Calvin and Lois in the spring of 1983, Brett Lunsford prepared to leave Tucson and return to the Pacific Northwest. Upon his return, he saw Laura, Heather, and Calvin play a show at Olympia's Smithfield Cafe, a small coffee shop hangout that served as a venue on occasion. Only a few weeks before, Brett had seen Minor Threat in Tucson. After the Laura, Heather, and Calvin show, he thought, these are two great shows and so different. This is what punk means to me. You can have both of these things on the same page. They both resonated with me. The band resonated enough with Brett that he wanted to organize a show for Laura, Heather, and Calvin in his hometown of Anacortes. With the help of his brother John, Brett arranged a show at the city's railroad depot. By that time, Laura had left the band, and Brett found himself as one participant in a lineup of stand-ins. Held on August 26, 1983, and billed as Karen, Heather, and Calvin, the band's performance that night utilized a rotating cast of players trying to keep it together. Also on the bill were legendary Seattle band The U-Men, Olympia mainstays Gary Allen May and Rich Jensen, and Brett's brother John Lunsford's high school band, Public Service. Accounts differ on whether Brett was asked to join the band just before or just after the show, but certainly the Depot show marks the first time the three members of Beat Happening shared a stage. I did play a couple of songs, Brett recalls, and my sense of it was, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. I went up there hyper casual. My memory is that I needed to put more effort into paying respect to the songs because I really cared about the songs. That performance was much too improvisational. Even as a fierce believer in improvisation, Calvin shares a similar memory of the Depot show, feeling that the event lacked enough structure to be functional. That really didn't work, Calvin says directly. It was just a mess. It was like, this is ridiculous, this isn't working. After that, Calvin sought to define the band with a core group of people, a task hindered and helped by Heather moving to Seattle and Brett moving to Olympia in September of 1983. One thing on which everyone agrees is the driving force that solidified Beat Happening, a trip to Japan. Calvin felt that as Americans abroad, the trio likely possessed inherent coolness. Plus, for a band as adventurous as Beat Happening, traveling to a country on the other side of the planet fit completely. When Calvin asked Brett to join Beat Happening, his request was coupled with a promise that if Brett joined, the group would go to Japan. A mission that bound the three together. While an endeavor of this magnitude would excite most young people, Brett possessed a mindset that made him even riper to accept such an offer. Just weeks before Calvin asked him to join Beat Happening, Brett spent part of the spring and early summer of 1983 on a fishing expedition with his family in Alaska's Bristol Bay. When a crew goes to Alaska, they're stuck there for months, Brett explains. He continues to detail the process of such an expedition. I have this boat, I'm going to rig it with this fishing gear, we're going to get a crew together, we're going to finance the groceries whenever we need to stock it, and we're going to take it through the Inside Passage to Alaska. We're going to fish for the summer. We're going to catch fish, sell it to the cannery, come back, and have a bunch of money. Incidentally, that summer, Bristol Bay yielded its largest haul of sockeye salmon of any year of the decade, 96,029 metric tons of fish. Even more important than finding success on the seas is the immeasurable effect on one's understanding of the world. As Brett saw it, that kind of adventure and departure was part of the culture. Brett comes from a family of Croatian immigrants, and his grandparents had moved from the island of Bella Luca to Anacortes, Washington on Fidalgo Island in 1906. Brett says that independence that comes from being on a crew of a fishing boat affects a mindset different from, say, a mining town or agricultural community. The same might be said for inhabitants of an island, a landmass detached from the mainland. Brett grew up intimately familiar with the geography of independence. Anacortes sits at 48 degrees 30 minutes north, 122 degrees 37 minutes west, which is less than 1 degree latitude, less than 60 miles from the contiguous state's northernmost point, Lake in the Woods, Minnesota, and just over 2 degrees longitude, around 100 miles from the contiguous state's westernmost point, Washington's Low Delta Islands. The variety of folks who made it as far as Anacortes had the hearts of true explorers. Bear in mind that large numbers of immigrants were content to arrive on the country's eastern coast and stay put. These defining archetypes inherited by Brett have always occupied his thoughts. He has conducted extensive research on family lineages during his work at the Anacortes Historical Museum and edited the book Croatian Fishing Families of Anacortes. The adventure of Beat Happening's music and the band's cultural quest to challenge conventions made sense to Brett. It was in his blood. It was so exploratory, he says. That was as important to me as the music, and I loved the music and believed in it. Okay, so I'm going to transition a little bit to the Japan chapter. I mean, it's a relevant jump, and I think that it just continues the story that I want to emphasize here tonight with this setup of setting out on an adventure for the crew. All right. So this is from the Jay's Japan chapter. The ambitiousness and audacity of Beat Happening's 1984 trip to Japan, only a few months after the band formed, typifies the courage that made them so unforgettable. According to Calvin, the whole idea of Beat Happening was, let's go to Japan. The adventure underscores the band's ability to act spontaneously and imagine a world without limitation. It also displays Calvin's philosophies of global connectivity. Although Calvin managed to arrange for the trip to provide school credit through Evergreen's liberal independent living contract and planned to use his time there to gather information for Op magazine, the band's visit to Japan had little aim or definition. We went there with nothing, Heather says. We didn't have any shows, we just flung ourselves out there and hoped for the best. We didn't really know where it was heading when we went, other than hoping we were going to play some shows. Similar to Brett's trip to Bristol Bay the previous summer, the band headed for the horizon, just open ocean, hoping to catch some fish. Luckily, they did have one piece of information, the name of a person who might be able to help them get established in the city for their stay, a former Evergreen exchange student named Ai Miyake. The Miyake family, Takaki and his wife Momoe, proved instrumentally helpful for the band. The one phone number we had was this family that knew a real estate agent who knew of a building that was going to get torn down, says Heather. The trio was able to secure an apartment in the building for next to nothing. However, the building, on the verge of being condemned, had no heat or water. The band arrived in Tokyo in the spring, but the weather was still cold, and Heather remembers the apartment being freezing most of the time. What the apartment lacked in bare necessities, it made up for in charm with traditional Japanese style, including tatami mat floors. Much of their time in Japan consisted of hanging around the apartment and listening to armed forces radio, likely one of the only forms of entertainment in English outside of speaking to each other. Members of the band all used some of their time to write letters and journals, and long noteworthy excerpts from these can be found in Los Maffeo's excellent booklet included with Beat Happening's box set Crashing Through. It was also via letter from Japan that Calvin first made contact with the Canadian's David Nichols, a fortuitous connection that would prove invaluable. As for sources of food, the band had to practice resourcefulness with what little they had. Calvin and Brett perfected an elaborate method of making whole wheat bread in a very small toaster oven, Heather says. This involved a trip to a department store, specialty food section to buy very small and expensive bags of whole wheat flour. The baking process included an aluminum foil tent that was adjusted periodically. Then we would sit in our cold apartment eating hot bread slathered in butter. Completely appropriate to the Beat Happening ethos, Calvin tells me the band didn't have a recipe. Beat Happening's elemental baking experiments in Japan parallel their approach to music and reinforce the idea that all one needs is the essentials. Calvin says, "We just knew bread was made with flour, salt, water, and yeast." The band did spend a good amount of time out in the city trying to track down an opportunity for a show, little missions, Heather calls them. They played briefly in Yoyogi Park, a public space that served as a gathering place for rock bands on Sundays, but they underestimated the ingrained machinations of the park system and found their acoustic guitar performance vastly overshadowed by highly organized groups with amps and full arrangements. Still, things were happening in Japan. We'd go off on some weird adventure, says Heather, and one thing would lead to another. Eventually, the band was able to play a show at a local high school after classes one day, a strange but oddly fitting place for a Beat Happening show. The high school show was literally all girls in their uniforms sitting on their desks with their hands folded across their laps watching us play, recounts Heather. She describes the show as a reflection of much of their time in Japan. It was all really weird, very Beat Happening weird. People didn't know what to think, but they were Japanese, so they were very polite. Eventually, the band locked down a few shows at actual clubs, even if they had to hit the pavement and sell the tickets themselves, and made connections with a few of the nation's purveyors of rock music. In another important achievement during their stay, Beat Happening recorded 5 songs to boomboxes purchased while in Japan, advanced models not yet available in the US. These songs would be released upon their return as a cassette entitled 3T Breakfast, and all of the songs would be included on the 1996 expanded reissue of Beat Happening. Japan itself becomes a character in these songs, both in lyrics as well as sound samples. In Youth, Calvin sings, "When I was young, I thought I was old. I sailed across the sea to Tokyo. I thought there must be more to this world than we're being told. When you're young, you can afford to be bold." The lyrics document the band's immediate location and offer insight to the line of thinking that enabled the band's trip in the first place. That final line rings with clarity and wisdom. In truth, it parallels the sentiments of punk, implicitly encouraging the listener to shrug off the pressures of finding a career or succumbing to traditional patterns of behavior. But the message lands without vitriol and angst. It sounds like an ideology capable of sustainability instead of a flash of reckless anger. The first track on 3T Breakfast, in my memory, opens with a sample of a street vendor in Nakameguro singing in Japanese before guitar strums and simple percussive claps interrupt. The 5-song cassette ends with Don't Mix the Colors, an unapologetically juvenile song that features the line, "I like the yellow as bright as your hello," and ends with another Japanese voice and a sample of the Tokyo subway. In keeping with their artistic precepts, Beat Happening make their surroundings part of the songs. In the fall, Calvin named several people evidently in his immediate presence. Bye-bye Mari and Momoe, bye-bye Takaki, bye-bye Ai in America, and bye-bye Heather. Everyone laughs. In this moment, Beat Happening incorporates not only Japan, but also the very room they occupy. In the same way mishaps of the Firehouse recording altered songs' endings, the fall uses the circumstances of immediate time and space to create an artifact from the Japan trip that captures genuine fun with friends. Heather sees all of these chance encounters, spontaneous shows, and impromptu recordings as similar to what she saw happening in Olympia. "I don't know how we ended up meeting, but we always did," she says. "Things just happened to work out." She reflects for a moment on how connected and unavoidable current communication tools have become, then says, maybe because people were more open to taking what comes and not having a plan, not knowing what was going to happen. There's always this pressure to make a plan and know where you're going and where you're headed. She pauses again and concludes, "Things like Japan and with the band and in Olympia just happened. It was like this cosmic wave." Thanks. Thanks, guys, for listening to that. Okay, well, I'm open for questions about anything and everything. So if you have a question, I will answer it now. Oh, I should, while you're thinking of a great question, I should say, we had some raffle tickets, and if you got one when you came in, great. But if you need one, you can get one from my wife, Holly, who's sitting there. And we're just gonna pick one of those out of there at the end of this question and answer part, and we'll give you a book for it if you're the winner. So it's like a fair situation, you know. It's a good setup, I think. All right. Anybody have any questions?
I'm just curious about the size and the title of the book, the 33 1/3, and just the small format. And it's a series of books.
Yeah. So the 33 1/3, you guys will probably all recognize, refers to the speed at which a long-playing album spins. So every book covers one album. So just about an album in specific. They've done like Beach Boys albums and Beatles albums and Bruce Springsteen albums, and so Beat Happening is the newest edition of that, and the book focuses on the first record. Every book's a little different with what they, some of them are very personal. Only one is fictional. It's a fictional. It's the Black Sabbath one, written by John Darnielle, is a journal of a kid in a mental ward, but it's fictional. But he's like listening to Black Sabbath and he's pissed and depressed. But they're all a little different, and so yeah. And the size, I think, the idea is to have them be accessible and pocket-sized and to series. So I think there's a uniformity to it. But yeah, I think it's a real honor to have Beat Happening as part of the series. I mean, I think it totally makes sense and is fitting. I think, you know, rock history or whatever, music journalism, shouldn't just talk about bands that are famous, but also about bands that are important. And I think the series is going that direction, you know? They're doing this one, and they're doing the Slater-Kinney one later this year, so that'll be really good. But yeah, thanks for asking. All right, what else you got? Evie.
What was the most surprising thing you learned about the band?
The most surprising thing I learned about the band. I don't know that I was that surprised by anything. My favorite like little tidbits, some of them were in that chapter. I really loved finding out that this summer that Brett fished Bristol Bay was like the largest sockeye salmon catch ever in the bay. I was really drawn to that. The research that went into this chapter, I was really fond of. I was born in July of 1983, so that was like within a month of Beat Happening's formation. So I feel like we were on this long trajectory of intersecting here, and that was fun and cool. It took forever to track down the flyer of that show, but we did it. Brett did it, I think, found it. So that was really fun things to learn about the band. I didn't answer your question, and I apologize, but I'll try to do better next time. All right, what else? They slotted me for 20 minutes, so I gotta just keep standing here and looking dumb if you don't ask me anything. You can watch me drink water. I'll try to make sounds with it.
So how did you come to write the book? I mean, was it a band you were following, or did they recruit you to write and you chose afterwards? I
was recruited, actually kidnapped. It was like a big net situation. I couldn't go until I finished writing it. The series does an open call, which is really cool because it's not about like having an agent or which people you know. They literally, one person reads every proposal submitted and picks the people. And they have between like 500, 600 submissions, and they pick about 14 every year and a half. So like 3% or something, 2 or 3% of people. But it's really cool. You know, it's a very egalitarian process. And weirdly, as an aside, I think that makes a lot of sense for the record I wrote about, you know. But yeah, I pitched it, and I actually pitched it twice. I pitched it the first time, and they put it on the short list, and we're like, maybe, and they said no. And then I sent it back to them, and I was like, are you sure? And they were like, you're right. We were wrong the first time around. So I think if the time was right the second time around, I think they wanted to do some records that were a little more about, you know, like I was saying, documenting bands that were important and not just, because the last time they picked Kanye West or whatever, and so then this time they picked Beat Happening, which, you know, just depends on what they're thinking at the time. It's kind of up to one person, so yeah, but good question. All right, what else? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have like a personal connection to that record or something? Like, why did you pick that?
Yeah, I think this album is so important because it lays the groundwork for so much that came after it. I mean, everything on K, essentially. This is a template for doing it yourself and just pushing record and getting some stuff on tape and putting it out to the world. That is kind of an ethos for making records. So I think that's really important, and still today, I mean, I don't really talk about technology or where we are now in the independent music landscape, but even still, it's mentioned briefly on the back of the book because I think what Beat Happening did is essentially what so many people are doing now. It's just they were way ahead of everyone else. So I think it's an important record for that reason. I chose it for that reason, I guess. I mean, I do love the record. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. I think it's great. But I also just thought it needed to be written about. And then I mean, the personal connection is just from being up here in the community. Every time I'm up here, I just love this community, and I think that, yeah, that was a huge draw for me. I think that the way this community supports each other in Anacortes, and in Olympia still today, those communities are really special, I think. So, thanks for asking the question. Yes, sir?
How long did it take you to produce this, and what else were you doing at the same time?
That's a good question. This took about 3 years from the time that I first proposed it until today. Or maybe even a little more than that. But like I said, the first proposal, between the first and second proposal, I didn't really do much to it. Other than make a better case for why Beat Happening. I didn't actually change the idea for the book at all the second time. It was the exact same. The only thing I changed was a more convincing argument for why it should be published. And I think they heard that, I guess. But the actual research was mostly done last summer. So not this past summer, but a year and a half ago. And I was in the area for like a month, just kind of traveling with anybody who would talk to me. And then I wrote it in like 6 months. That was the first draft, and then finished editing it this spring, and then the final draft was done in July. And I'm a full-time high school teacher. That's my full-time gig. I also run that blog, which doesn't pay anything at all ever. I just spend money on it recklessly. And then I do that print journal, True Sincerity. So I was doing some, interviews and writing about music, and I'm also a photographer, taking lots of photographs and teaching full-time. So, and also getting married. I got married during the time that the book was being written. Like 2 months before the final draft, I was like, seems like a good time. So yeah, it was a really busy 2 years. Just crazy. I just didn't sleep at all, just cut out the sleeping part. And I was able to be productive in all those other areas. Did I answer everything you asked? How long did it take and what were you doing? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for asking. Yes?
Do you feel like you derived some like direct comparisons between both your artistic journeys and the fact that you grew up in Austin versus like Pacific Northwest? I know that we've both been very musical communities.
That's true. Yeah, Austin is a very musical community. And so is this, but I want to move here instead. Austin's just like a machine. And I mean that. My house has like persistent leaks and I can't sell it, but if you want a house in Austin, I'd trade you. But I think this is an example of, as I kind of like a sustainable, like real community of people supporting each other. I hate to like come up here and shit on my own community or whatever, but there's some great people working in Austin, but it is like a machine of music where everyone, it's just like kind of really tiring more than sustaining for artists, I think. It's just a period of time before you're like, I can't do this anymore. I mean, seriously, like all the time. It's the exact opposite of here. Music all the time, but then there's a point where like the best artists in town are like making public statements that are like, I just can't do it anymore, guys. And here it's like people who've been playing music for 30 years are just still showing up and playing shows and feel great about it because they're sharing in it together. So it's weird. I hate to attack Austin, but that's the honest answer. It's kind of the antithesis. But it is fun. Just come visit for like a week or whatever and just don't stay there. Yeah, I don't know. That's the truth. All right, what else? Now people are just going to draw me into like a consistent, like, what else can we get him to say terrible about where he's from? All right, what else? Anything else?
I just want to say that's a great analogy.
Oh, yeah.
It's a wonderful community.
Yeah, it's true.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, of course. Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having a great community. John had a question, and then I'm going to go back there. John?
What did you leave out of the book that you wished you could have put in?
Well, I kind of got a little bit of an opportunity to do some of that. I mean, I feel pretty good about it. I feel really solid about everything. I'm really proud of it. I think it really came together. And this week on 33 1/3's blog, which is just 333sound.com, or if you just Google 33 1/3. Google's always the most awkward word to say into a microphone ever. No one can say it in a way that sounds good. But if you Google 33 1/3, I'm sure you can find their blog. And I wrote a post for the blog every day this week. So there's some stuff on there that's peripheral and I think fun. The first thing I wrote on there is kind of how I came to be here, which I talked about a little bit here, but not everything I said in that post. So that's one. The second one's kind of like an analysis of Beat Happening as a postmodern band. So it's kind of a more academic take or whatever. The third post is, I can't remember right now. The fourth post is a video interview with Calvin. So that that's something you can't do in the book. So you get a real, like, there's Calvin. So, and I don't know why I can't remember what the third thing I read about was, but looking for help over there, no help. Anyway, those are some things that I felt like, oh, I can put these ideas here that I thought about after the fact and didn't put in the book. I mean, I wouldn't have put the first thing in there because it was more about me, but, so those are some things, and you can read them. I thought about doing an appendix like later or something for all the things I left out. So if I do that, you're on the mailing list. I'll put you on there.
What's your favorite Austin food truck?
Oh, well, I guess I cheat and say Torchy's because I think they're still a truck, but they have numerous locations now and are probably going to take over the world. I don't know what they put in those tacos, but Eastside King is very good as well. That was like Paul Key's original trailer. Yeah, those are two.
Arlo's.
Arlo's? Who said Arlo's? Oh, you said Arlo's. Yeah, Arlo's is good. It's like a burger place. Veggie burgers. Any more food questions? Wait, I think we had food questions last night in Olympia too. Always want to talk about food. All right. Anything else? Well, thanks again to every single person that we're going to announce the raffle. I really do feel so lucky to be here, guys. I know I've said that a million times, but I can't really say it enough. All right. The winner is 499606. There you go. Thanks for coming. Thanks to Anacortes Music Channel for hosting us. Some bands are going to play in a second. We'll probably do if you'd like to buy a book, now would be a great time. And Watermark is selling books over here. I'm happy to sign up for if you want that. And please support your local businesses over here. And we'll take a little intermission and then bands are going to play in just a second. I think the Crabs are going to kick us off. So stick around. Thanks for coming.